Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us today for an introduction to Tonic AI, the fake data company. My name is Kiara. I'm the product marketing manager here at Tonic, and I'm really excited to introduce you to several of my coworkers from across the company who are going to be headlining today's session. We have Omed Habib, our VP of marketing, who will be presenting the problem that we're solving for and the results we're helping teams achieve. Kasey Alderete is our head of product. She's going to detail our solution, spotlight our latest feature releases, and provide a demo of the platform as well. And Andrew Colombi is our CTO, and he is a co-founder of Tonic. He's here to answer all of your most technical questions, from the challenges of subsetting to the guarantees of differential privacy. So we clearly have lots to cover, lots of opportunities for questions to come up. Please feel free to ask your questions at any time. You can put them in the chat. You can put them in the Q&A function of Zoom. I will be looking out for them in both places. And I will also jump in to ask these questions as they come up. So don't be shy. Without further ado, I will pass the mic over to Omed.
Thank you, Kiara. All right, jumping in. Okay, so super excited to chat about Tonic. I am going to go over the problem section, and then I'm going to hand the mic over to Kasey to chat about the product, as well as a product demo. So I'll try to keep the slides to a minimum. I know slides can be a little bit boring, but my ask of everybody in the audience is I love to also keep this conversational. We, the panel, we will answer your questions as they come, so feel free to jump in. Without further ado, let's chat about Tonic. Now, before we go into Tonic or the actual product itself, I do want to set the stage here a little bit. So you, probably a software developer or someone who's involved within the software development process, know the challenge of building software. It all starts from a local sandbox or dev environment, probably your local laptop with some kind of virtualized environment. The goal is for you to build features, check in the code, and that code advances to different stages in the pipeline before it finally gets to production. The challenge with each of these stages is that you try to mimic your production environment as much as possible. Now, why do you do that? Obviously, it's because you want to make sure that your feature or the QA or the security, whatever stage of the CI/CD process that you're in, is as efficient as possible. And in order to be as efficient as possible, you have to mimic and replicate an environment, whether it's infrastructure or data. So the challenge here, of course, is that when it comes to the data portion of it, you might have the application infrastructure and the settings and the configuration an exact match to production, but the behavior of your application in a pre-prod environment is only as good as the test data that you're using. And so that's where Tonic steps in. And what we do, which is a bit different than probably how you're doing it today, is we will take data from your production environment and synthesize for you a test data set that looks, acts, and feels like production, because it's actually made from production, right? And so with that, in real time, with that data, we will saturate your pre-prod environments. So Tonic will connect to a production environment, and using a few different configuration settings, which Kasey will show you here in a bit, we will then synthesize for you a data set that you can use in your local sandbox, your QA, security, or staging. It doesn't have to be the entire production database. It can be a subset of that. In some cases, if you're running petabytes of data in production, you can generate a 1 gigabyte file that maintains the structural fidelity of your production environment and behavior of production with data that is de-identified, no personal information, but again, it looks, acts, and feels like production. So with that, introducing Tonic. Like I said before, Tonic is test data that looks, feels, and behaves like production because it's synthesized from production. Kind of a funny question, but if anybody here does not or prefers to stay away from real sugar, but uses Splenda, I see some of you guys smiling. If you use Splenda, you'll notice on the Splenda packet, it'll say on there, it'll say tastes like sugar because it's made from sugar. It's an analogy that I use to describe Tonic. Anyway, geeking out here for a sec. Tonic was founded a few years ago by 4 brilliant people who came across this problem in their past lives, including Andrew, who's on the call right now, our CEO, Ian Coe, Carl Hansen, and Adam Kamor. They came across this problem in trying to fix bugs in pre-production environments, but trying to stay compliant with all sorts of regulations, especially in the financial space. You might be in healthcare, you might be in any industry across the world. And you have the same challenge, right? You can't use production data in a test pre-production environment. So how do you get quality testing done without compromising customer security and privacy? We have an office in San Francisco, Atlanta, and New York. We are roughly, I think we're probably over about 70 employees now, growing pretty quick. With $45 million total raised. We announced our Series B late last year, $35 million round that was led by Insight Partners. We do have some of the largest software deployments in the world, very proud of that. So we deal with extremely large scale. One of our largest customers is eBay. And we do specialize in some of the most regulated spaces, specifically finance and healthcare. However, we have customers from across the entire spectrum of verticals. Every company today is a software company. And so if you have software engineers, whether they're local or remotely distributed with a CI/CD pipeline, they probably have a very strong need for test data. The higher quality the test data, the more productive software developers can be. At eBay, we actually have quite a few case studies. I won't go into too much detail on the case studies. They're all on the website on tonic.ai. But if we have time later, I might even touch upon eBay here in a bit. Excellent key results. I won't go into too much detail on this slide. Again, all the case studies are on the website, but I do want to point out a couple very interesting key results. One is Everlywell. They were able to reach 3 to 5 times more releases per day. I mentioned earlier, some companies have petabytes of data. You'll notice that eBay has a total of 8 petabytes of prod data. I'm sure that number has actually increased by now. They're able to synthesize a subset of that prod data to a 1 gig file that they use in their pre-prod testing environments.
I made a question for you just before we go on. I think a lot of people might be asking before Tonic, what have teams been doing historically to solve this problem, since it is such a huge problem? And why is that previous solution no longer working?
Yeah, fantastic question. Let me back up a little bit to our second slide here, because this is probably where I should have talked about this. What they're probably doing, and Andrew, you can probably jump in here as well, because you've seen a lot from the field as well as Kasey. There's a few ways that they solve for it. The first one is they use a third-party product to generate random arbitrary data. The problem with that is that the larger environments, larger companies, larger data sets, you break the integrity of the data. In other words, your test environment doesn't actually match the behavior of your production environment. And when the data is arbitrary, there's a major loss of signal in exchange for noise. The other option, which I really hope you're not doing, you being the customer, people who are listening to this, is using production data. I unfortunately have seen more admissions than I wish was a reality, where VPs and CTOs in engineering admit that they're actually using production data in pre-prod environments. They admit it's an anti-pattern. Some of our customers have since deprecated that practice and are using Tonic now to follow best practice. And so there's more ways in which you can do this. We have a really good book, coincidentally published, co-authored by Chiara, called Test Data 101, which I strongly recommend that you download. We outline, I think it was 5 different ways in which people are creating test data today, and why it's a bad idea. Yeah. Did I cover all of it, Kasey? Andrew?
Yes, and I'm going to build on it too, kind of depending on which angle you're coming from, because there's a couple of different ends of the spectrum that people are approaching Tonic from.
Super curious if anybody in the audience has a method that they're using that we didn't mention. Feel free to mention in the chat, and I'd love to talk about it. All right, let's keep going. I bet you guys are all pretty excited to see the product, so I don't want to waste too much time on some boring slides here. All right, so supported databases. We do cover some of the largest, most popular databases that exist today. all SQL, including recently introduced last year NoSQL database, our first of many, MongoDB. Now, that's the source database. But once you bring Tonic into your CI/CD pipelines, then there's also the ability to extend its functionality and integrate it into your automations. So we have customers today that trigger Tonic automatically and very neatly integrated into their pipelines using tools like GitLab, for example. Everlywell, one of our case studies, does have automation built in place to, during a pipeline, trigger Tonic to saturate a test database as the artifact advances through eventually into production. So as well as Jenkins, for example, it's not limited to what's on the screen. You'll see why here in a bit. Kasey is going to cover how we extend Tonic in the product demo.
Great. So I think I get to start sharing the product. So I'm going to start giving a framework to how we structure the product and our approach to solving this problem. So the first one is talking about the usefulness of the data. And so we use a process we call mimicking, which is really taking your existing production data, looking at the characteristics and mimicking that in a destination database. We do that with what we call our generators. Those are transformations that you're applying based on the data type, based on the statistical properties, that really looks more deeply at the relationships in your data. The second thing is that we are really shielding your data, and we're providing this separation between your production and staging environment. The way we do that architecturally is that we're integrating at that database layer. So we natively integrate with these databases and are able to kind of sit deeply in the stack so that privacy isn't a separate step you do. It's built right into your workflow. It's the developers are continuing to use those same environments for developing and testing, and they don't have to do anything differently in order to get safe and useful data. The third thing I wanted to highlight is our subsetting capability. Not only does Tonic make data useful by making it accessible and realistic, but a lot of times we found that developers and testing environments, you need a subset of the data. You know, eBay doesn't need all 8 petabytes in order to build a new app. They need a representative subset in order to troubleshoot, do local development, have something that fits on a developer laptop. And our subsetting capability is very powerful. It will identify the relationships across tables. It will traverse those foreign keys to bring back a relevant subset that's referentially intact. So that's more useful and productive for you. So the next slide, I wanted to just give a taste for the building blocks for privacy that we use. So these are the generators that are available in Tonic. This is kind of a fun graphic, but just kind of explaining the features. And you can think of it progressively, that some of the generators that we have are based on the data type that you have. Some are based on statistical properties that are present within a column so that we can make sure the same distribution is present in the output as it is in the source. There are also ones that will let you do consistency. So when you want predictable outputs or you want to link columns across, you know, these are, you can think of them as sort of composable, that you're applying the right generator based on that data type, its sensitivity, the privacy level, you know, taking all of that in account. And kind of moving on from our base generators, I want to introduce our smart linking generator. This is our first machine learning based generator that's available in the product. And what it does is it automatically detects and builds a model based on your source data. It trains a neural network to identify all of those relationships, maybe that you don't even know that are present in your data, you know, correlations across columns. After that model has been trained, we use that model to generate entirely new synthetic data. So there's a clean break between your source and your output data. This is a proprietary piece of technology. It's available in several different kinds of data. As you see here, they're listed different generators that we have. And it's something we've put a lot of work into with some of the architects that you can see on the page here.
Quick question for you, Kasey. Someone has asked, what if I need a generator that you don't currently have, like for data specific to my database?
Yeah, the good thing is that we have really these core building blocks, breadth across on nearly all data types. Now you'll find some edge cases kind of specific to databases, and sometimes we can add those. But what's really interesting is that this core set actually meets most of the needs, regardless of what industry you're in. It's all the similar type of data. Once we support SQL Server and Postgres, we know how to treat a lot of those data. We can also write custom generators if that's something that you need. We can do that really well because we can make sure they're performant and truly private. So that's something we kind of look at with our customers to find any edge cases that are there.
All right. Product demo time?
Yes, so I can share my screen. Okay, so this is Tonic. I'm showing our hosted version today, and Tonic is also available on your own premises. And the unit I want to start with is talking about the workspace. So the workspace is kind of the technical implementation of what Omed showed on that first slide. Omed was showing how Tonic will link production all the way back to the lower environments. And this is where I was talking about, it kind of depends on where you're coming from as a starting point, how you view the workspace. A workspace is a connection between a source and a destination database. And if you are coming from an environment that is more open, where data is flowing freely from production down to staging, you can think of Tonic as that gate, as that separation of concerns. And this is where we're protecting that data so that it's not leaking through freely. If you are coming from somewhere that's very locked down and you can't access production data, then you can think of a workspace as that path for giving dev and test teams access to realistic data. So the workspace is that connection, and whether you see that as a gate or as a new path, that's going to depend on your point of view, where you're coming from. So within a workspace, I'm going to dive into the privacy hub. So this is within a particular connection. I'm actually showing a Postgres database here. So we go like to like. So this is from Postgres to Postgres. And we are sort of like an ETL tool. We transform it in flight. We don't store your data. We're taking it, we're de-identifying it and writing it into the destination database. We take your source schema. And within the privacy hub, we can get an overview of the current state. So there's a little bit of a workflow here. There's a lot going on, but there's a little bit of a workflow to de-identifying your data. The first step is to scan for sensitive information. Then you're protecting data with generators. And then when that's all complete, you're generating data. And generating is when we're actually populating that destination database. So this is a great place to get started and kind of to visualize how Tonic actually works. So Tonic is detecting different fields, and you can manually enable or disable the sensitivity flag. Tonic's looking at the column names, looking at data patterns to detect what might be sensitive or at risk. Anything that hasn't yet been protected is going to show up as an at-risk field, and Tonic will surface all of those right here in the privacy hub, so I can take action right here. So you can see something like the email. I can confirm with the preview button that yes, in fact, those do look like email addresses, and Tonic is suggesting the email generator. So I can click right here and apply that right here from the privacy hub. So once I've got my connection, the only thing that I've done so far is just to click that and start protecting fields. You can see as I apply these generators that the number of at-risk fields is decreasing, protected fields is increasing. You can see the audit trails populating here as I apply those. And this is a great place to just get to know the data set. We have customers with really large and complex deployments, and this is just kind of a helpful way to get started with where are my most at-risk fields, maybe surveying across the database. But once you're a little bit more comfortable, you're going to want to operate kind of at scale as you think about large databases. And that's what we're going to use the database view. So the database view will let you see your whole schema. And this is really about power tools so that you can do things in bulk. So we're thinking about narrowing that focus. Actually, I'm going to pop back to the privacy hub You see this number, this is the one we're really focused on. We really want to think about decreasing that number 40, of making sure we've addressed all of our at-risk fields. So in the database view, I can start by maybe ruling out particular tables that I know I don't need, and I can just truncate right here so that we can drop the rows and not write them to the destination database. I could also maybe select some tables like stores and vendors and identify that. Let's see here. I could, oh yeah, stores and vendors, and I can select them.
But you're not gonna truncate from on the production side. What you're saying is you're going to truncate on the QA side, the destination.
So truncate's just dropping the rows. We'll still copy over the schema, and then we're just not going to populate new rows in there. So I can bulk edit the sensitivity there. I can also apply filters here to kind of figure out what I need to narrow in on maybe the sensitive and not protected fields. I can also just type ahead. So something like name, I want to see how am I protecting name across the database, for example. So if I want to apply a name generator, I can see here in the preview, this is going to let me see what my original data was, what a mocked up version, a sample of what the output will look like. And this all looks right. Alexander becomes Thelma, John becomes Kyle. That will help my application look and feel as it does in production. But one thing I'm noticing is that Melissa, there's 2 entries here on the source side, and it's mapping out to 2 different values on the output side. Now, this might be fine for names, but you can imagine there are times when you need output values that are predictable, that are consistent. Maybe there's some implicit relationship that your application's expecting, or you want to replicate the frequency of which it's happening. And so you actually need the same inputs to have the same outputs. And so Tonic has a feature called consistency. And when that's on, I can see that Melissa is always going to map out to Rosella. So it's still de-identified, but I can start to replicate the same realism, maybe messy data. Maybe that person signed up twice and I want to actually replicate that in my test environment. That's a helpful edge case. And that's what consistency is for. So any questions here, I guess, before I move on from the database view?
Yes, just about consistency. You know, it works across tables. Does it also work across database types, you know, from Postgres to, I don't know, Redshift?
Yes. And so we don't store a mapping anywhere. We're not like storing that Melissa is Rosella. That's not something that can be compromised, but we're using a seed, and that seed can be used across this database. It could be used across my Postgres and Mongo databases if I want to keep them in sync so that those email IDs or unique identifiers are always having the same key on the output.
That's great. Thank you. We also do have a question that has come through that we'll probably speak to. I'm not sure if you were going to show the smart linking generator again, but a question about it. Have we conducted any testing to understand if the smart linking ML generator creates synthetic data sets that preserve the correlations between attributes and targets? Also asked for a white paper. I'm going to post a link in the chat for everybody that kind of details, you know, comparing the original source data to the output generated with smart linking. But if anybody on the panel wanted to speak to that question as well, specifically the question asker is interested in understanding of machine learning, how generated metrics such as F1 and RMSE compare between the original data set and the synthetic data set.
There's a lot of, go ahead, Kasey.
Well, I was saying, I'm going to show the very basic building blocks of what that's leading up to. If you want to speak more to the advanced, Andrew, or we can circle back, what I'm going to show is how you can sort of manually replicate what smart linking does sort of by magic using a model. So I'm going to show you about like linking between columns, but I wasn't going to speak to any of the higher level calculations. And if you wanted to.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just want to read the question because there was a lot of acronyms in there as well. So the short answer to your question is yes, we have done specific testing comparing different machine learning models on synthetic data that we've created using machine learning models. Like, so, you know, it's machine learning evaluating other machine learning. And I believe we even have a blog post about it that we can, yeah, is this the one, Chiara, that you just linked? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm just going to peruse this to make sure it's exactly what I think it is, but pretty confident. Yes, in this one we do use, so in this one we, in this blog post, I'll just summarize it quickly. We compare training several machine learning models on real data as well as on our synthetic data for a common machine learning benchmark data set. It's this data set called the King County housing data set. It's something that, it's out there. People use it in research, et cetera. But you can take a look at that blog post to really get more detailed, granular things about what things we tested. And yeah, happy to answer more questions if you have more.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and dive into the table view. So this is a little bit more granular view of the generators. You can see every generator I've applied, I'm building a model for how Tonic is going to de-identify the source data. And with this live preview, I can actually see the mocked output data right here as I'm working. So I spoke about generators earlier in the slides as sort of the building blocks. And it's the unit of privacy. It's where I take into consideration what is the use case here? What's the need for how private this data needs to be? What are the characteristics that I need to preserve or protect? So I wanted to show one, the categorical generator here that will actually take the source data and shuffle the values while maintaining the same ratios that are present in the source. So it's looking at the statistical properties, like I said, within a column. You can also see here within the categorical generator, there's an option to have differential privacy. This is where I'm going to get rid of outliers in my data. You could imagine that being really useful, particularly in something like income, where even if we're shuffling the values or averaging the values, the mere presence of a really large outlier would reveal something about my information set. So if you have mostly $50,000 salaries, you have 1 million, that's going to tell me something about the data that I wouldn't have otherwise known. And so the differential privacy being on will actually apply some mathematical standards to making sure it can't be reverse engineered, remove those outliers while preserving as much of the fidelity as possible. And we do use some more advanced algorithms and mathematical calculations there to make sure that that's true. So the next part is going to get more complex here. We've talked really basically about sort of data types and maybe within a column, thinking about those relationships. But now I want to start to look across the relationships across columns at a deeper level. So this is sort of a retail data set, right? It exists in the real world. It has real meaning. And I know things like if I have a customer that has a higher annual income, they're typically going to be spending more at my store. So maybe largest bill amount is related. And so I need to maintain that relationship. So I can apply the continuous generated annual income. That's going to maintain the variance within the distribution of incomes. And I'm going to do the same thing with largest bill amount, apply the continuous generator. But now I'm going to link largest bill amount to annual income. And so now largest bill amount is a function of annual income. So it's looking at the data and understanding what is that relationship. Maybe I also know that store membership is another determinant of how much they spend. A member maybe would spend more than a non-member. So I can add a categorical there to the store membership. I can partition my largest bill amount by store membership card. So I'm creating all of these relationships across the data that one is a function of the other, and that as one changes, it's going to impact what scenarios I want to replicate in my destination database. And this is where the smart linking comes into play. I can do all of this manually, where I can identify these links and these relationships that are present in my data. What smart linking will do is when I apply that to the columns, it will train the model and it will train a neural network. And then using that derived model will generate fresh data from that model that will populate the destination database. We have done a lot of parallelograms and different analyses to make sure that the fidelity of that data and that those models are statistically representative. That's where, if Andrew, if you had anything else you wanted to add, this is kind of where that would come into play. But I can apply smart linking generators just as I've built up some of these other generators. The smart linking you can think of as having a higher fidelity representation to the source. It's going to maintain more of that.
And I think another thing worth pointing out is that you just apply smart linking to that continuous and categorical. You don't have to, choose a different generator for each, and you don't have to specify the linking or the partitioning. It just kind of simplifies the process for the end user while making it more nuanced on the back end.
Right. The smart linking is right here. There is a trade-off in terms of time. So, it takes some time to train the model and to do it that way. And so it's just something you have to think about for your use case of how high of a fidelity of data you need, depending.
And that feature is live, right? It's technically GA.
Yep. Just showing it right there as I can add the smart linking.
And you can always access our docs. I think you may have already talked about this at docs.tonic.ai.
Yep. So one of the last generators I want to show, there's a whole host of generators depending on the data type that are available. So, different date generators to model time there. The last one I was going to show is starting to get into semi-structured data. And this is helpful for thinking about our support for MongoDB and documents. So even in a relational database, it's pretty common to have JSON, XML blobs, and just wanted to show how data can really leak through if you're not also masking that. So let's look back over here. This first customer, when I turn off preview, it's Alexandra Sanford. When I have the name generators on, or at least the first name generator, Alexandra turns into Leonida. If I scroll over to this JSON blob, so this might be like a customer profile, right? Or a form that they've filled out online. Alexandra's coming through. I've mapped Alexandra to Leonida, but Alexandra's coming through here. And that's where I want to use a JSON mask generator. So I can actually traverse using JSON path, traverse that blob, and then apply a generator. Using consistency, I can make sure it's the same name that I've masked it to in the other part of the row. And now you can see that it's changed to Leonida. So Alexandra turns to Leonida here in that column, as well as on this column. Alexandra goes to Leonida. Now I'm going to move on from kind of the masking portion of thinking about protecting my data and talk a little bit about subsetting. This is a really powerful part of Tonic. There's a lot of embedded technology that's going on once we turn subsetting on. All that I have to do is to turn subsetting on to decide what my target is. Am I trying to go for a particular percentage? Is it a smaller data set by 10%, half, or is it a particular subset, maybe based on a characteristic? So for here, we have marital status, married. And Tonic is going to use all of the logic present in my database, looking at foreign keys. If you don't have foreign keys in your source database, you can use Tonic to identify what those relationships are. And then I'm going to get a preview of how many rows are going to be returned. How much data am I going to get back when I'm using that where clause? I can actually dive really deep into the algorithms here too. I won't do that now, but common use cases are for local development, remote work, so that you're not VPNing into a staging or development environment, offshoring, customer troubleshooting. Maybe you just need that one customer scenario, but traced all the way through the database to replicate and find where that bug is happening. So it's all around kind of the shift left testing and how much can we discover earlier by getting better, more representative data sets when developers and testing teams need it.
Hey, Casey, this feature is only as good as how well your foreign keys are defined, right?
Yeah, it's going to be based on how good your data is. We do find that a lot of our customers discover things about their data they didn't know once they start digging into this. They didn't know that they didn't have foreign keys present in their data. That's why we've got a foreign key tool here to actually declare what those relationships are with Tonic. But it is an iterative process. So the last thing I wanted to highlight before moving on is just thinking about how Tonic really exists in the real world. So it's a full platform, and we exist in customer environments where it's not the only tool. There are lots of teams using it. So I wanted to highlight a few things that helps Tonic fit into your world. One is in terms of automation. Everything is scriptable and helps you plug it into the CI/CD pipeline, as Omed talked about. We can run SQL scripts after you've run a Tonic job. We can call out to webhooks so that you can link us up to other tools. In terms of collaboration, Tonic's got built-in SSO, role-based sharing of workspaces, commenting. So we're seeing a lot of our larger, more complex deployments of Tonic to make use of a bunch of these features so that Tonic's just a part of their overall workflow. And finally, I wanted to highlight or talk a little bit about how Tonic thinks about privacy. So you can see the number has gone down. We were at 40 earlier. Now we're down to 25. But really think about privacy as the intersection of how sensitive your data is, how well you're protecting it. But you also want to think about the use case. There's going to be different requirements for how private the data needs to be if you have internal users versus if you're posting something publicly. Depends on the utility requirements that you have, if you do need very high fidelity data. So you're making those trade-offs as you go through Tonic. And one thing we've added for visibility into kind of where you're at, this snapshot of your protection level in Tonic, is the privacy report. So every time I generate data, I've got a job and a job report associated with it. And we provide some summary level statistics to know that when I generated this data set on this date, this was the privacy level at that time. So I can see which fields Tonic thought were at risk, what were protected. This is just the counts, but I can also get the detailed CSV export. This is really helpful for when you're communicating what's been done in Tonic to external stakeholders. So you can think about centralized InfoSec teams who want visibility into what are you doing in this tool? What was protected when, and how was it protected? So I'm going to show a stylized version of that CSV here. This just helps you understand what's going on in Tonic, making that transparent. So the privacy report has got 4 sections here. We've got the schema that we're reading from your source database. We've got the sensitivity level. This might be what Tonic auto-detected or what you've manually flagged as sensitive. We'll detail the actual protection that was in place at the time of generation. And we've got some more advanced reporting on the level of privacy protection that's in place. So this is available for all of the data that Tonic has de-identified. This is just a snapshot, obviously, but we provide all of that raw data to you so that it's something that you can share and communicate to understand.
Great question just came in on the subject of privacy about differential privacy and how, there's the balancing that trade-off between data utility and data privacy. And so the question is our differential privacy option on the columns just to remove outliers as was shown, or is this trade-off parameter, the epsilon, something that is able to be customized for how noisy the synthetic data is?
I can take that one. So, it's easier to explain to a general audience how differential privacy works when you've kind of couched in the terms of outliers, but it sounds like from your question, you know a little bit more about how differential privacy works under the hood. And like, it's not as simple as just removing outliers, right? It's like a whole process of making sure that your algorithm isn't unduly impacted by a single row in the database, so that like if a given entity were to be removed from your data set, you can be sure that it doesn't drastically change the output that you would create with your algorithm. So, no, it doesn't just remove outliers. It does the real differential privacy stuff, which is kind of difficult to explain in even 15 minutes, let alone 30 minutes or even an hour. To answer your other question of, do we allow you to change the epsilon? In short, no, right now we don't. Most of our customers haven't really asked for that in a detailed way. We could easily make it a parameter in the, in the code. It is a parameter in our code. It's just not one that we expose in the UI or anything like that. But for what it's worth, the default parameter that we provide people is epsilon of 1. That's just kind of based on our research of the literature and what seems to be common practice.
Andrew.
I'll add one kind of conceptual nuance to that that's present here in the privacy report. So when we talk about data being protected, that means we've taken some action to obscure the original value. And there's different levels of protection that you can apply in Tonic. The 2 levels we think about that we're summarizing here are anonymized and masked. So when data is masked, it means we've maybe shuffled the values, we've removed kind of the obvious data that was present there. But you can imagine if I was wearing a mask, you could still probably tell it's me. Maybe I have a mask over my eyes and you can't tell what color my eyes are, but you can probably still tell that I'm short or that, I've got brown hair or like some other characteristic about me. And so masked is a lower level of privacy protection than anonymized. And anonymized, there's different ways you can achieve that. One is by making use of the differential privacy generators. Another is by virtue of being data free. So when we talk about using a first name dictionary, we're literally you're telling us that it's a first name and we go into our dictionary and we provide a first name. So that has nothing to do with your source data. That is, completely anonymous. We can't learn anything about your original data set. The smart linking generators would also result in anonymized data because we are, training a model that we're using to then generate data. So anywhere we've really broken that link completely, obviously there's trade-offs in terms of utility. And so there's different use cases that require, fully anonymized data or particular fields that need to be anonymized versus just masked. We see it all as protected, but you'll have to bring your own policies and requirements for how you think about that trade-off.
Thanks for bringing that up because it's true. There's a lot of variability in how people interpret the words mask versus anonymization versus synthesis. And it's important for us to kind of define the way we're thinking about it as well. Thank you, Kasey.
I just got a question if I can jump in real quick. It was in the private chat. The question, I suppose, is for any one of us. Can multiple teams use the same source database with different configs? For example, my data science teams versus the QA teams.
Yes. So each of those workspaces is, I want to drop something, is independently managed. So we can create different workspaces using the same source data. So we can have our prod replica, and then we can create an environment for staging. Maybe it's different than maybe a local developer. We can also think about different subsets. We could think about data scientists might need more of the models and a higher fidelity of data than is represented by kind of the rough approximation for a developer environment. So yeah, we can think about each of those workspaces being managed independently, or we can keep them in sync, using our APIs and kind of copying over those configurations so that you are keeping them in sync.
Thank you for that. Follow up to that same question. Who usually owns then the administration of Tonic?
That's a really good question.
That's probably subjective to the company, probably.
Yeah,
I personally have seen
maybe 3 models I can think of. So the most common, or I think where we've seen the most success, is where we have a DevOps team or an SRE team that's centrally managing Tonic and creates, is hosting Tonic, is setting up the users and kind of managing the availability of Tonic, and then publishing Tonic to development teams to start making use of creating different environments for each new app that they have that they're working on or test suite that they're running. And so in that case, you get a lot of different Tonic users. You have maybe 3 or 4 that are managing Tonic, but you might have 20, 30, 40 developers across the entire organization that are all using Tonic based on whatever needs they have. Another model is just a central team that does all of the Tonic work and does all of the de-identification. That's usually when you have a smaller company and a couple of people have enough knowledge of the data and the use cases. So it depends on how how centralized the knowledge of data and downstream requirements is. And that's going to affect who do you need to give access to Tonic. Okay, I don't know if you want to hop back over to the slides, Omed. We have a couple more if we want to dive in to customer.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I just want to end with at least this, as far as the slides are concerned, looks like we have some time. Interestingly enough, before I start presenting my screen, we talked about a few case studies. They're all on the website. You can check them out. But one case study in particular, eBay, they published a blog. I think it was in December, maybe. The VP of Engineering, Cynthia, customer of ours, published a blog doing an internal case study on how Tonic actually fell. So let me just share my screen really quick. I'm probably just going to show, matter of fact, I'm just going to show the blog itself. I have it opened up here on a second tab.
I'll post a link in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, so Kara's going to share the link. Check it out when you get a chance. It's a fantastic blog. I'm just going to give you a very quick little 30-second high level. eBay's challenge, you can probably imagine like the sheer size of not just data volume, but like just the company itself and the amount of software engineers that they have. It's in the thousands. And the challenge that they had internally was, hey, we have a staging environment that's broken. It's not actually being used. What do we do? And the blog goes into how they dissected the problem. One of the options actually was, let's not actually have a staging environment. Let's go ahead and just do kind of sort of like a canary test in production. In other words, like use production as our testing environment, right? Which is not unheard of. A lot of companies do this, especially during deployments. Blue, green, or canary is actually a very popular methodology of deploying today, and consequently actually testing in production. But the blog outlines why that was not a feasible option. One of the primary arguments against that was that we can't test against production data because of the manipulation in some of the test suites and the integration tests. Anyway, long story short, they did end up restructuring their staging environment. They were able to re-architect it, make it usable, bring utility to it. And one of the core components, one of the core ingredients to the recipe of success for the staging environment was to have a tool like Tonic to be able to provide data that looks, acts, and feels like production, has high utility, but at the same time, preserving the privacy of production data. So check that out. I could keep going with more case studies, but I don't want to bore everybody. Plus, I think we're almost here at time. Do we have any more questions online?
So we do have a follow-up question to the question earlier around differential privacy. With respect to data utility, is there any reporting, quantitative measures, or other descriptions that indicate how representative the generated data is? In short, beyond the Tonic guarantee, are we able to see any quantifiable evidence for how close we are to the original data?
Casey, you want to do that, or do you want me to cover it?
I was going to say, I'll start because you're going to have much more detail. I'll start by saying we have it in the works. So we are looking to add sort of the corollary from the privacy report, which talks about how well your data is protected, is to actually provide in the product some more utility reporting. So what's the data quality like, how near it is to that source data?
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that really is if you look at the blog post that was previously posted, you'll see kind of a preview of the kinds of things we're looking at. It's a tough question because I think there are different things that people would care about. And there's a lot of like generic statistics you can do, right? Like correlograms and that kind of thing and regressions. But in the end, the thing that probably matters to you most is like, does it work for the worst use case you have? Like, does it work for the model you're trying to train, or does it work for the BI that you want to do? And it's hard to generically answer that question. One of the things we've considered is making it easy to connect, like a really one-click way of connecting Tonic to a Jupyter notebook. So you can like really quickly try a hypothesis with the data that Tonic generates. We're not there yet. That's still something that's like kind of more distant. We're going to start with simpler things like the correlograms and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's a tough question to answer because what utility means to one person is not the same as to another. And it's difficult to like generically capture all utility in a few charts.
Great, thank you for that. Another question around frequency. Omed, you mentioned Everlywell, releasing 3 to 5 times faster on a daily basis. How often are Tonic users running generations? How much are Tonic users even dependent on Tonic data?
Probably every day. We have a customer of ours. I'm not sure if I can share their name with them publicly, but I'll probably hold off on sharing their name. But they said that if Tonic didn't work, their software development process would come to a halt, which kind of shows you, how dependent organizations are on good, high quality test data. I would say in the least, you definitely want to change data or create a generation anytime there is a schema change. So absolutely. And Tonic does have a built-in schema change alerting tool so that if there is a schema change, you can then apply the correct generator and then, generate data. Everlywell, in particular, since you mentioned them, they have an automation in place that using our API, which is also in the docs.tonic.ai. You can check out the API and build your own custom integrations with it. GitLab will trigger a generation every time a pipeline is triggered. So there's a post-commit hook, code gets checked in, GitLab starts a CI/CD pipeline, artifact moves forward, and once it hits the QA stage, GitLab will then hit the API, trigger a data generation. So now your QA database is now saturated, up to date with, and of course your production environment obviously is changing, right? So every time you hit a generation, you're now getting the latest and greatest. And so artifact goes through a QA process, probably even a security process, and then eventually advances over into production. So that's like an example of the other extreme, which is, completely real time every single time there's a deployment.
Yeah, I was thinking about that one quote that you mentioned of if Tonic stops, development stops. Let's see what other questions we did have come through. This is a philosophical question, actually, from me. The approach of connecting directly to a user's database as opposed to uploading files or things, something like that. I think the answer there is interesting as well.
What do you mean by uploading files, actually?
Well, like as opposed to uploading a table, like here's a table of data.
You mean like uploading kind of arbitrary data and rather than data that's based on their data?
Or no, I was thinking a data, a table at
single CSV or something,
yeah.
Right? So like a single flat file.
Like
or a SQL dump file,
replicating their environment.
Yes. What was it that led us to our approach of?
Yeah. I got you now. Really what it came down to is we wanted to support the developer use case first and foremost. And we've since gone beyond that. Like there are definitely data science teams working with Tonic, sales teams working with Tonic, support teams working with Tonic. But we started with a developer use case, and developers have databases that they need to connect their applications to. And so, that's what we needed. And I wanted to make sure that it would work for the developer. If you start building a product that can do really great job with CSV, it's actually just like a huge chasm to overcome between that product and a product that works with databases. So it's not like a stepping stone along the way. You kind of need to start with databases if that's your plan. Otherwise, you're going to struggle to make the rest of it work. Does that answer?
I would add, it's kind of what I alluded to, is that being at the database level, it's something that's built in. It's not this separate step that like, oh, I have my data, now I need to go de-identify it before I go use it. This is not a process change. It's sort of fundamental to how data is made available internally. And so it's not reliant on a human to remember or to follow the right process of where I'm supposed to go. We can actually set down the controls of, no, like nobody else can access production, and that data is limited to who can access it. And it is built in that making it available internally.
Yeah. We are at the top of the hour, and I do have like one last question that is probably a huge question that could be a full hour in and of itself. But if you could just speak at a last snippet, what are the challenges involved if you wanted to build a similar solution in-house?
Oh boy. I think we have some writing on that on our website that you could probably plug, but I'll just say briefly, I think there are two kinds of engineers in this world. Engineers that haven't done this before and are like, yeah, that's probably pretty easy. And engineers that have tried to do it and be like, no, it's impossible. Can't do it.
That's a really good answer.
So, and the truth is, if you haven't done it before, it is extremely, extremely, extremely difficult. It's much harder than you think it is. And having a whole company doing it is probably the right choice because it's very hard.
Thanks to everyone, all our panelists, speakers. Thanks to all the great questions that you all had for us today. We welcome them at any time. I did have one last slide, Omed, if you want to pull it up, but I can also just rattle it off, how to get in touch with us. Feel free to reach out to us. You can reach us at hello@tonic.ai. You can find us on social. We're at Tonic Fake Data, and our website, www.tonic.ai. We'd love to hear from you. You can book a demo on our website. You can also sign up for our free trial of Tonic. We've got a sandbox, 2-week free trial. You get support along the way. You can connect to your own data, really see Tonic in action. It's a great way to test out the product. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.